Did you know that Bricks Builder query loops can loop through any array of data? And that includes data that came from an API call. So it could be an array of arrays in an options table or ACF or MetaBox fields, or it could be an API call to something like Google Sheets, Google Places, Facebook, HubSpot, another WordPress website, whatever you can dream up, as long as it returns an array of arrays, then you can loop through that in Bricks. I'm going to show you how to do that in this video and share some code at the end of it to get you started. I would rate this video as an intermediate level, so if you're not comfortable with coding, you might find this a little difficult, but stick with me because even if you're not familiar with coding, this could be a good starting point for you to start getting your teeth into it and doing something useful that you can use in your Bricks projects. Okay, so today is the 4th of January 2025, and I'm going to be using Bricks Builder version 1.11.1.1, which is the current version. So if you're watching it sometime in the future, things may have changed because they sometimes do with the page builders. I don't believe it'll change too much, but they may change. Okay, so a bit of a visual explanation of what we're talking about today. So on the screen here, you can see a query loop, which is basically getting posts. We have a title, we have the number of views, the number of likes, and some copy. And that's all coming from a API, which is this DummyJSON.com. And I'm in the documents and I'm looking at the posts and I'm looking at the get all posts feature. So we go into get posts, get all posts. That's the endpoint we want. So the endpoint we're looking for is this DummyJSON.com. And the action, so when you're doing REST calls, you generally have a base URL. In this case, it's the https://dummyjson.com with a slash, trailing slash, and then anything after that is the action that you want to create or do. In this case, we're just using posts as our action. If we call that URL, it's going to return an array which has a first key is post, then it's got a key of total and a key of skip and a key of limit. Post has an array of arrays, which is what we want. So we can loop through that. So this array here, where we've got an ID1, title, body, tags, etc. This will be a multiple of those. And the trick that we have to navigate here is that with Bricks, there is a filter called array values in your dynamic data. So I think that is documented. It is here somewhere. So array value as a filter, but that is a single depth key, which means that if you have a deeper array, this will not work for you. In fact, it says here that it flattens it into a JSON string if it is a array. What happens if you have something like this data here where our posts array has some top level tags, top level keys. And then you look at the reactions. Reaction is an array with a key of likes and a key of dislikes, which has a scalar value. So with this built-in Bricks method, we cannot access the likes and the dislikes using that method. So we need to come up with a different method of doing that. And what I'm going to use is a thing called dot notation. So it'll be reactions.likes, reactions.dislikes to access those subkeys. Okay, if you got even more complex and your array was using JSON HAL, which is a hypertext application language, here's an example of what it might look like where, let's say, for example, this embedded one, we're going to have to look at embedded, author, links, self, href. How do we get to that? We're going to use dot notation, so we do the underscore embedded, dot author, dot underscore links, dot self, dot href will get us to this value in the array. So that's the methodology that I'm going to use today. So let's have a look quickly at what else we can do with this. So I've got Google reviews. So I'm using exactly the same methodology, but I'm using the Places, Google Places API, getting some reviews from a dummy review and displaying this in Bricks in a query loop in exactly the same way I'm displaying these posts. That's the concept. Okay. Let's have a look at how this is built. We're going to focus on this dummy JSON one because the Google reviews is a flat array, which we could use that Bricks array value with the Google one if we wanted to, because there's no depth in that array, whereas the DummyJSON's got a little bit of depth, so we'll focus on this one to show how that works. So if we edit that with bricks, what we can see in here is we've got a standard bricks query, which will explain how we created that. And inside that query, we've got a heading. And now heading, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here, or a lot, I should say. I've got a dynamic tag that I'm creating called deep array from loop, and we set a key path. In this case, it's just title. But if we look at the next one, which is the basic text here, in that, we've got a deep array from loop again. Our key path is just views, all right? And our deep array from loop again, our key path is reactions.likes. So if we look at our data, views is a top level key. So we just need to go to views. For reactions, we need to go reactions and then likes. So we're going to go reactions.likes. Okay, so that's what we've done there, reactions.likes. It'd be great if Thomas and team could do that with this array value, just make that work with dot notation, and then we won't need any of this custom code for it. All right, so what we have there is the way we display the data by accessing any array key, no matter how deep it is. So we can use this with any API or local data, so from ACF or your own options table, your own tables that you've created in MySQL. It's up to you how you use this. You would access it in exactly the same way. So to get this data though to be able to loop through, we need a query. So we're going to go to the query loop above that. We can see here, if I click that drop down, I've got post, terms, users, and I've got two more that I've created, Google reviews and DummyJSON. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well. And when we select DummyJSON, it adds two extra controls, what Bricks calls controls, which is these input fields. One we've called action, the other one we've called result path. So if we look at the action first, so our action, so our base URL is this dummyjson.com. Our action is posts. We want to get posts. If we're going to use this for products, our action would be products. Okay, just to get all products. If we wanted to get the first product, it would be products/1 would be our action that we'd put in there. Okay, so that's why we're using the action to say to the API, what part do we actually want to get? So we're just going back to our post because that's the one we're using. Now, then there's the result path. That is the key path to the results that we want. Okay, so if we have a look at our data again here, so our top level is called post, and the posts has an array of posts, array of post fields, I should say. So what we're going to do up here is we're going to tell it we want the result path of posts. So the key, the first key. So if this, we looked at this recipes, for example, get all recipes, our path to that would be recipes. So instead of being posts, we would have recipes in the result path. Okay, so that's how that part works. And it's as simple as that once you get it set up to use. And I'm going to show you how to do all this now. Okay, so WP code box I'm going to use just to keep it simple. You can put this wherever you like into your functions.php or create your own plugin or whatever you want to do. Okay, I'm going to just collapse this on the side here so we can have a bit more space to see this. So in my common, I've just the common functions regardless of whether I'm going to get Google reviews, DummyJSON, HubSpot, Facebook, doesn't matter. These individually are set up for that particular API, but we have some common stuff that each of these does. So in our common, we've got some debugging. I've created a constant called WP debug. I've got that to set to true at the moment, and I'm using BugFu debugger, and I've got a wrapper for my BugFu, because if you disable BugFu and you try to log to the console, your site will crash saying that the class doesn't exist. So you got to remember to comment out all your BugFus before you disable it, otherwise your site will crash. So we don't want that, so we're going to put a wrapper on there, and we're going to say if BugFu is enabled, so if the class exists of BugFu, meaning it's enabled, and our WPE debugger set to true, then we want to output to BugFu. And I've created an array because BugFu takes only one object. So I want to have a context and an object. So the context might be, where did this come from? The object is what is the data you want to look at. Okay. We have a single bricks dynamic tag, which is the deep array from loop, which we saw a little bit earlier, with a single attribute, which is key path. And then I've got some sample stuff in here like reviewer.name. We have a fallback we can put a fallback in there. There's also a default if you don't provide the fallback. So this here, the name is important because that's what it's going to put onto the editor when you select it. You can just do the deep array from loop by itself. I've put these in so that they're a reminder that these are the attributes that you can set. You need to set the key path, but you can set the fallback if you wish to. All right, and then we give it a label and we put it into a group. Let's have a look at where that works. I'm using Advanced Seamer, so this is going to come up a little bit differently for me than it does for you that aren't using Advanced Seamer. If I click on Dynamic Data, I get my WPEasy group up here with my deep array from loop, and it's got the default that I just created there. So if I click that, it's just going to insert that into the page. If you're not using Advanced Seamer, it'll be a drop-down list that comes up under here. Same sort of concept, just not as easy to navigate. So that's that. That just basically puts that option in the list there. It doesn't actually do anything yet. It just makes it something we can select as a dynamic tag. We then have a couple of filters here. So to render our tag, Bricks uses 3 different filters for that. One of them we're not going to worry about. The 2 we will worry about is the dynamic data render content. That is when it's rendering it in the editor. What do we want to do? How do we want to edit that? Okay, and then we have another filter, which is front-end render data, which is obviously how do we want it to render on the front end. So you can be different functions if you want to. I've got these both pointing to the same function. Okay, and again, we can do some BugFu logging if we want to. Content is your entire page content. So it's got everything on the page. We look for the deep array loop to see whether that exists in the content. If it doesn't, we just return the content. We don't want to do anything. We then find all of the tags, so we can have lots of these tags on the same page. In fact, when we look up here, we've got that, 4 times there, and then it's looped out through the page to the rest of this, so it's in there multiple times. So this is going to match all of those tags. If there are no matches, return the content. Okay. We then go through and separate out our attributes. I'm not going to go too deep into this. This here basically separates our attributes into a associative array. So we end up with a key path and a fallback if it's defined. If it's not defined, then we set a default for it here, which will be saying value not found in path with the key path. Okay. We then replace in our content the tag, which is the tag that was found, with the current loop object value that it finds. So I've got a separate function for that. So WPE.notation from current loop object, we're going to pass in our key path and our fallback, and then basically we're going to replace that in the content. So heading down to here, we've got, that's not something we need there. So this here is the dot notation from current loop. Basically what we're doing here is we're calling another utility to do our dot notation, passing in our key path, using the Bricks current loop object. So which iteration of these are we up to? Which element of the array that we've got from the API or from our options is it up to? It has that array in there. Okay, and our fallback, right? And then it goes to this deep notation, our WP get array dot notation. I've made these names far too long to try and make sense of them. And it's dot notation. So we want to explode the key path at the dot, and we're going to iterate through the keys. If the if it is a array, so the source array is an array, and the key exists at the next level, then we're going to replace our source array with the current array index with the key. So that just traverses the array going down. if any of these key paths don't exist, we're going to return the fallback. So that means that something is wrong with our key path because we did not get to a value. Okay, and once we get to the end of that key path, we're going to return what we say is source array here will actually be the scalar value of the last key in the key path. And that's as simple as that. Okay. This here we will come to when I show you the next bit. So this is a thing that I got from Itchy Code, an idea I got from Itchy Code with some great resources there to move your controls, which I'm going to talk about now. So that's the utilities, the common utilities. Let's have a look at the DummyJSON. So DummyJSON, we're going to use transients, WordPress default transients, or standard transients, to cache our API calls so that we're not calling too often. At the moment for testing, I've got that set to a time to live of 15 seconds, so that every 15 seconds it's going to clear. You would set this to whatever you feel is appropriate for your API. How often does the data change? Does it change every minute? Does it change every day, every hour? You would set this so that you're not doing API calls when the data probably hasn't changed anyway. So if I set this to day in seconds, or it's going to wait a day before it does the next API call. So about 15 seconds just while we're testing is fine. All right, and then we're going to set our constant for our endpoint for this dummyjson.com. Okay, now the next thing is we're going to use a bricks filter, which is set up control options. And all we're doing in here is we're adding to the query types, give it a unique ID, and we're going to give it a name of DummyJSON. This is the WordPress function to escape HTML using the text domain as bricks. So DummyJSON is what we want. So if I look at in my queries, there's my DummyJSON in the drop down there. That's all that thing does. It does not do anything apart from add that to the dropdown. We need to do a bit more work here. Now I've actually refactored this since I actually redid this video because I did it and then I thought, we can make this so that it's much easier to duplicate these and set them up for new APIs. And one of those things was when we have our WordPress add action with a action here, normally what you do is you put a function name in here for your callback, and then you create the function and then add your code in there. But to do that, we need to come up with a unique name for every API that we create. So we might have 3 APIs that we're using. We're going to come up with unique names for each of those functions. Another option is to, instead of putting in a string there for your function name, for your callback, you put in function, and that creates what they call an anonymous function. So that is your callback, is that function there. Whoops. So that is the reason I've done that, so that you don't have to keep thinking of what name am I going to call this. This entirely depends on your coding style, but I think this is a simple way to do it. Okay, we're then going to, on init, we're going to, on our container, block, and div, so this is default in Brick. So in containers, blocks, and divs, they allow you to have the query loop, okay? And on that query loop, in this case, we're adding some controls. So these imports bricks calls controls. I'm going to do the same. I want to allow this to be available on containers, blocks, and on divs. So I'm just going to say containers, blocks, and divs, filter through each of those, or iterate through each of those. And Bricks has a separate filter for each of these. So we want to call that filter, and on every one of those, we want to set our callback here. Again, we're going to use an anonymous function so we don't have to think of fancy names. And on there, all we're doing is getting our controls, creating some new controls, an ID. Have a look at the documentation and Bricks controls. There's a heap of documentation on that. Which tab is it going? Is it on the content tab or the style tab? What's the label of it? What type of control? There's topography, there's color pickers, there's sizing, spacing, there's all sorts of controls in Bricks. Just look at the documentation. We just want a text input. Okay, and our placeholder is enter the action part of the URL. For this to show, our query object type must be WPE, JSON, and a loop must be enabled. The query loop must be enabled. So what that's saying is that the WP-JSON here, which is our dummy JSON, that must be selected. So that must be selected, and the query loop must be enabled for these controls to get added to the settings panel. That's what that's doing there. I'm going into a bit more detail than I anticipated here, so hopefully I can speed this along. Anyway, so we're adding a action and we're adding a result path. Okay, I probably should have called that a key path in hindsight because it's to be consistent. So we've got a action and a result path. Okay, that's it. And the last thing we've done here is we've told it to move the control. So I've created a utility function. We're going to pass in our controls. So that's all the controls and our new controls. So what the controls are, everything in the settings panel here. Everything you see in the settings panel is a control, and that'll be in the controls. One of the problems with Bricks, the way they've done this, is when you add these controls, by default, it just sticks them at the end. It sticks them at the last point on in the controls. But we want those controls to sit up underneath our query, so it just makes more sense. Itchy Code had an example of this, which I've just stolen the idea, and we've created a come on, there we go. This move controls after query. All this is doing is it's using some fancy array logic to find the query. So find this query here, find that query, and then place our controls after it. So that's all that's doing there. You don't need to worry about that too much. Just use this and it'll work beautifully for you. All right, so that's that. And then we need the filter to actually run. So when it's rendering on the editor or on the front end, the filter's actually got to run. So what we're going to do is on our filter for our Bricks query run, again, we're using an anonymous function, so we have to come up with a name. We are going to make sure our query object type is WP-JSON or just return the results. We don't want to do anything unless this is for us. We're going to get our settings object. So settings is all of the settings, so everything that's set on this panel here. We're going to get our WP action, which we defined up here in our new controls. We then are going to call the API. So we're going to call the JSON get API. And I'll step over this step here. If we get a result from that, if the result path is not empty, if the result path is empty, we're just going to return the result. If the result path is not empty, so it's got a dot notation or path, we're going to call our deep array dot notation with our result path settings, with our settings, result path and the result, and we're going to return that part of the array. So we're going to not just, so the API might recall, what have we got here? So if we go to our recipes, actually, let's go to products, see what product shows us. So products, here we go. So in our products, if we were using the products as our base, there's all our products there. So our top level key is products. Then we've got total, skip, and limit. Right, so if I want the products array, I need to return products. Okay, so this whole array is returned from, it's a whole object, I should say, is returned from the API, but we just want the products from that. So we'd need the path for it. Okay, then this is going to be depending on your API endpoint. We're going to call this from up here, WP dummy JSON get, and we're going to set a transient unique ID based on our transient name from above, underscore, and we're going to do an MD5 on the action. The reason I've done an MD5 on the action is that in your actions here, you might have something like, new equals 1, all right? That does not make a good query name. Okay, that there, a transient name. So we need to, because it's got characters in there, it doesn't make a good transient name. So what we need to do is MD5 the action so that we get a unique transient name that will work as a transient. Now what we're going to do is tell our result to get the transient from that transient UID. If it exists, then we're going to just log a message if BugFu is enabled and debugging is enabled, and then return the result. So we're not going to do any API calls. We're just going to return what was in the transient. Okay, that's our caching. Now, if that doesn't exist, so the result doesn't exist, so the transient's expired, we're going to get a new API call. So we set our endpoint to our default base dot action. So we're going to append the action using WP remote get. So get, that's a built-in WordPress function, get our endpoint. If there's a WordPress error or the response code is not equal to 200, 200 means it's successful, then we're going to delete the transient and we're going to BugFu out an error. And I'm going to return a single, so an array with a single array in it in posts, so that we can actually display this in the editor on the first pile to say, hey, there's an error here. Okay, that's just something I decided to do that way. And there's lots of ways you can deal with error handling. I just thought that was an easy way of doing it. Okay, and then we're going to decode the response from the body, remote retrieve body, and set our transient. Now this transient is going to live for as long as that TTL is set to. So in this case, it's only 15 seconds. If it does a day, it's going to live for a day. All right, and then we're just going to BugFu out that we got this from the API. So let's have a look at the actual front end of our DummyJSON. Have a look at our console. And we will see the first DummyJSON get, we got it from the API. Okay, because there was no transient. 15 seconds it expired before or since we looked at this. The next get here got it from the transient, and it's telling us what our transient name is for debugging. So if we disabled BugFu or set our debug in our WP Go box to false, then none of this is going to get output. So that's how that works. If I refresh again, if that's been 15 seconds of yakking I got from the API, if I refresh again, it didn't get it from the API. In both cases, it got it from the transient because the transient was still there. So that's the debugging. That's the caching. And that's pretty much how this works. Now, I think it's a really cool way of doing it. I like the fact that in here, all we have to do to get to our path is put in a tag, put in an attribute for key path. What is the path to that? If it's a deeper path like our reactions likes, so it's the same tag, different attribute, reactions.likes, works exactly the same way. So you would use this regardless of what API or data that you're going to feed through it. So I think it's a really cool way of doing it. Love to hear your thoughts. If there's anything I'm missing or you think that I should be doing differently, love to hear those thoughts. But if you like this sort of thing, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and enjoy. Thanks, guys.